In most modern fantasy, the scene on the bridge would go like this. The wizard raises his staff, he speaks the formula. The demon is unmade in a wash of light, and the protagonist's allies stare in awe at the power they had not understood until now. Read what Tolkien actually wrote. There is no formula. There is no incantation. The most magical passage in The Lord of the Rings is, in the strict grammar of the page, 4 sentences in which one being tells another being who he serves and where he comes from. The Reddit thread that asks why Gandalf doesn't cast spells has it exactly backwards. Gandalf doesn't cast spells because, in the moral vocabulary Tolkien spent 36 years building, casting spells is what the bad guys do. A few months ago, a thread on Reddit asked, in mild exasperation, why Gandalf, who is technically an angel, fights orcs with a sword and a stick. Why doesn't he cast spells? Where is his spellbook? Where are the fireballs? The thread caught fire, climbing past 4,000 upvotes, because everyone who has read Tolkien after reading Harry Potter, or after rolling a wizard in Dungeons & Dragons, has felt that small bafflement at least once. It is a fair question. It is also, as it turns out, the wrong question. The reason Gandalf doesn't cast spells is not that Tolkien forgot to write them, and not that the rules of his world are vague. It is that Tolkien spent 36 years, from the poem Mythopoeia in 1931 to the essay accompanying Smith of Wootton Major in 1967, building a theory of magic that is the deliberate opposite of what modern fantasy now means by the word. He did not give Gandalf no spells because he was being coy. He gave Gandalf no spells because, in the moral vocabulary Tolkien spent his life refining, casting spells is what the bad guys do. To see this clearly, the modern fantasy frame has to be set down. In a 1954 draft of a letter to the science fiction writer Naomi Mitchison, Tolkien admitted something that ought to be quoted more often. "I have not used magic consistently," he wrote, and indeed, the elven queen Galadriel is obliged to remonstrate with the hobbits on their confused use of the word, both for the devices and operations of the enemy, and for those of the elves. I have not, because there is not a word for the latter. Read past the polite Oxford phrasing, and what Tolkien is saying is, the language we have for this is broken, the reader's confusion is real, and the inconsistency is the point. The hobbits in the story call Galadriel's mirror elf magic because it is the only word they have, and Galadriel pushes back gently. This is what your folk would call magic, I believe, though I do not understand clearly what they mean. The author and the character agree. There is no system here, because a system is already the wrong category. What Tolkien has, instead, is a moral grammar, 2 of them intertwined. The first is a vocabulary of opposites, subcreation versus domination, art versus apparatus, music versus the engine. The second is a single inviolable line, the will of the other. Cross that line and whatever you are doing, however beautiful, however well-intentioned, becomes something Tolkien is willing to call evil. To understand why Gandalf carries a staff but not a spellbook, those 2 grammars have to be unpacked in order. So the puzzle has to be set aside, and the foundation has to be laid first. In 1931, before The Hobbit was published, before The Lord of the Rings had been imagined, Tolkien wrote a poem for C.S. Lewis. They had been arguing about myth. Lewis at that point was not yet a Christian and dismissed myths as lies breathed through silver. Tolkien, walking with him at night along Addison's Walk in Magdalen College, told him that myths were the opposite. They were the closest thing fallen humans had to truth-telling about reality. The poem he wrote afterward, Mythopoeia, contains the line that would become the metaphysical foundation of everything he ever wrote about Middle-earth. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. We make still by the law in which we're made. The word sub-creator is Tolkien's coinage. It means a maker who participates in the making done by the maker, not an originator, but an ornamenter. 8 years later, in his Andrew Lang lecture at St. Andrews, the lecture that would be published as the essay On Fairy Stories, he sharpened the same idea into philosophy. The storyteller, Tolkien said, makes a secondary world. The reader enters it. While inside, the reader's mind grants what Tolkien called secondary belief. That is not pretending, it is a real act of imaginative participation, and in Tolkien's view, it is the highest thing a creature can do, because creating is what God does. To make a world is to act, in our small, derivative way, in the image of the one who made the first one. None of this is background theology. It is the engine room of the legendarium. Open the Silmarillion to its first page, and the universe is a piece of music. Eru, the One, proposes a theme. The Ainur, the angelic spirits, take that theme and elaborate it into a great music. They are sub-creators. They make, but they make with what Eru proposed. They ornament what is already given. And then, into this music comes Melkor, the Ainu who would later be called Morgoth. And Melkor's sin, the original sin of Tolkien's cosmos, is not pride in the abstract and not lust for power as such. It is something more specific. He wanted to compose his own theme, not Eru's. The text is exact about this. He had gone often alone into the void places, the Ainulindalë says, seeking the imperishable flame, for desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own. The imperishable flame, the spark of independent existence, the thing that lets a being make rather than only attune, is not something the Ainur possess. It is, in Tolkien's words, with Ilúvatar. It cannot be found anywhere else because it does not exist anywhere else. And so Melkor's quest is a literal impossibility dressed up as an act of will. He wants to create ex nihilo, the way Eru does, and the universe is built so that this is precisely the one thing that cannot be done. What Eru says to him, when the music is finished and the discord is resolved, is one of the gentlest and most devastating sentences in modern fiction. No theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in Ilúvatar, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. This is the metaphysical flaw of Middle-earth. Every act of making by every creature draws on the music. There is no rival source. The elves' craft, the dwarves' forging, the songs of men, the very weather, all of it is participation, ornamenting a score already written. The two trees in Valinor, the Silmarils that hold their light, the Mithril of Moria, the phial of Galadriel that carries the light of Eärendil's star. Every magical object in Tolkien is a piece of beauty made within the music, by a maker who knows themselves to be derivative. This is what the elves' magic actually is. In a 1951 letter, a 10,000-word letter to a publisher named Milton Waldman, the longest single statement Tolkien ever made about his work, he put it plainly. The elves' magic, he wrote, is art, delivered from many of its human limitations, more effortless, more quick, more complete. And then, in the same sentence, the moral hinge. And its object is art, not power, sub-creation, not domination. That second clause is the whole episode in 8 words. Art, not power, sub-creation, not domination. Hold those two pairs in mind, because everything else in Tolkien's theory of magic falls out of them. If sub-creation is making within the music, what stands against it? Tolkien answers this in the same letter, and his answer is one of the most surprising sentences he ever wrote about fantasy. Magic, he says, magic, in the bad sense, is all use of external plans or devices, apparatus, instead of development of the inherent inner powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world, or coercing other wills. External plans, devices, apparatus. That is not the language of incantation and arcane glyphs, it is the language of engineering. And Tolkien immediately makes the equation explicit. The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized. The enemy in successive forms is always naturally concerned with sheer domination, and so the lord of magic and machines. Stop on that phrase. The lord of magic and machines. Tolkien is talking about Sauron, and he is putting magic and machines on the same side of a single dividing line. To Tolkien, the wizard's wand and the factory smokestack are the same thing in different costumes, because both are external devices used to override the inner nature of the world and the wills of others. The 1951 reader might have heard this as a quaint, anti-modern grumble from a man who hated cars. The 2026 reader, looking at a smartphone, ought to hear it differently. Tolkien lived through the Somme, where industrial machinery turned a generation of his classmates into mud, and through the Blitz, where industrial machinery dropped fire on the children of Birmingham. When he wrote that the enemy is the lord of magic and machines, he was not being cute. He was naming what he believed was the same impulse, traceable from the first dark Vala to the cooling towers visible from the window of his Oxford college. You can see this equation walking around on legs in the figure of Saruman. Treebeard's gloss is famous for a reason. He has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. Saruman starts as a wizard, a member of the same order as Gandalf, and he ends as an industrialist. Isengard becomes a factory, the trees come down, the streams are dammed and fouled, Uruk-hai are bred in pits. The continuity from Saruman's magic to Saruman's machinery is not a metaphor in Tolkien. It is the same activity, recognized at different scales. And the ring itself, the central object of the whole story, is the archetypal piece of apparatus. It is external. Sauron poured his power into it precisely so that what remained could be carried, worn, applied. A ring is a device. The very inscription on it is a domination spell rendered as a contract. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. The verbs are rule, find, bring, bind. This is the technology of compulsion. Tolkien gave it the form of a piece of jewelry because that is exactly what it is, a wearable instrument for the coercion of other wills. This is why a magic system, in the modern fantasy sense, with its rules and costs and tiered abilities, would be unwritable inside Tolkien's legendarium. The moment you systematize it, you have built apparatus, and the moment that thing is in your hand, you are no longer making. You are engineering. And engineering, applied to wills and to the living world, is what the enemy does. So, finally, to the Reddit question. Where are Gandalf's spells? There is an answer in the text, and it is not subtle. It comes from an essay called The Istari, drafted in the late 1950s, never finished in Tolkien's lifetime, and published only after his death in Unfinished Tales. The essay describes the wizard's arrival in Middle-earth around the year 1000 of the Third Age, and it lays out the terms of their mission with a precision that very little else in the legendarium matches. The wizards are not human. They are Maya, angelic spirits of the same order as Sauron himself, sent westward by the Valar to help organize resistance. 5 came. 2 vanished into the east, and we are not told their fates. 1, Saruman, fell. 1, Radagast, wandered into the woods and the company of beasts. 1, Gandalf, called Olorin in Valinor and Mithrandir among the elves, completed his task. Now here is the binding clause. The essay says the Istari were forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of majesty, or to seek to rule the wills of men and elves by open display of power, but coming in shapes weak and humble, were bidden to advise and persuade men and elves to good, and to seek to unite in love and understanding all those whom Sauron, should he come again, would endeavor to dominate and corrupt. Take the clauses one at a time. Forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of majesty. They could blaze. They are angelic. They have, in their proper nature, the kind of presence that Glorfindel briefly shows on the road to Rivendell, a warrior of the host of Valinor, terrible to behold. The Istari are forbidden to do this. The old man's body is not a disguise the way a spy's costume is a disguise. It is a limit, deliberately accepted, on what they are permitted to be. Or to seek to rule the wills of men and elves by open display of power. The verb is rule, and the modifier is the wills. The line that the Istari are told not to cross is the same line the ring crosses on every finger it touches. They may not bend the will of the free peoples, even by the legitimate authority of their angelic nature, because to do so would be to repeat, in miniature, what Sauron does in full. But coming in shapes weak and humble, were bidden to advise and persuade. Not command, not enchant. Advise, persuade. The Istari work through reason and counsel. They are sent into Middle-earth not as a strike force, but as teachers. And the only sanctioned tools of a teacher are the tools that pass through the listener's free assent. Once you have read that paragraph, you cannot unsee it on every page Gandalf appears. He gives the Council of Elrond information and lets them decide. He sits up all night talking with Frodo about a ring inscription. He rides to Edoras and speaks, at length, to Theoden. And the healing of Theoden, often thrown around as a magical exorcism, is in the text mostly a man shaking off his despair, while Gandalf walks him to a window and shows him the sun. He lights pipes. He sets pine cones alight with his staff to scare wargs. He nudges Frodo back to consciousness. He encourages, exasperates, mourns, jokes. That is the job description. Persuade. Unite in love and understanding. Do not rule wills. Do not display openly. The reason Gandalf doesn't cast spells is that the Valar, the angelic powers who sent him, explicitly told him not to. And there is one further beat the Reddit thread tends to miss. The Istari were also, Tolkien says, embodied in real bodies, subject to the fears and pains and weariness of earth, able to hunger and thirst and be slain. Gandalf tires. Gandalf falls. Gandalf sleeps when he is tired. None of that is narrative convenience. It is doctrine. The Maya accepts the limit so that the work can be done at human scale, by means a human can recognize and choose to accept or refuse. There is one scene in The Lord of the Rings that the Reddit framing always lands on. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Gandalf alone, the Balrog rising, the staff struck down, the bridge cracking. This, surely, is the moment of real magic. This is the wizard fight. So read the speech. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. There is no spell here. There is no incantation. There is, in the strictest grammatical sense, no command issued at the Balrog at all. Look at the structure. 3 of the lines are statements of identity. I am, I wield, you cannot. The 4th is an imperative addressed not to the demon, but to the situation. Go back to the shadow. The fifth is a repetition. What Gandalf is doing, in the most magical passage of the entire book, is not casting, it is naming. The Sindarin makes this unmissable once you know it. Arnor is the sun, and the sun, in the Legendarium, is the last fruit of Laurelin, one of the two trees of Valinor. Flame of Arnor, therefore, means the light of the trees, the light of the west, the light kindled by the Valar at the dawn of the world. The secret fire is the imperishable flame, Eru's own creative principle, the very thing Melkor went into the void to seek and could not find. Gandalf is announcing his lineage. He serves Eru. He carries the light of the trees. Udun, the Balrog's flame, is Sindarin for hell. More specifically, it is the name of Morgoth's first stronghold, Utumno, the pit in the far north of Middle-earth, where the Valar found him at the beginning of the world. The Balrog is a Maya who fell with Morgoth at the dawn of time. Gandalf is therefore not just calling the Balrog a name, he is reminding the Balrog whose servant the Balrog is. Translated literally and uncompressed, the speech reads, "I serve the imperishable flame and the light of Valinor. You serve the pit of Morgoth. Go back to your master's ruin." This is two Maiar meeting on a bridge. One has remembered who he is, the other has forgotten. Notice what is happening underneath the famous lines. There is no apparatus. There is no incantation in a constructed magical language. There is only the act of correctly naming what each being is in the cosmic order and aligning oneself with one side of an ontological line. The magic is true speech. It is Tom Bombadil singing the white back into sunlight. Get out, you old white, vanish in the sunlight, in a higher register. It is Luthien singing the chains off Beren in Tolin Gaurhoth. It is the music of the Ainur, performed on a bridge by one voice. This is what counts as a spell in Middle-earth. Not a memorized formula, not a ritual gesture. Patterned breath, used to bear true witness about reality. The closest thing the Legendarium offers to spellcraft is the act of singing what is the case. And you cannot sing what is the case if you are a creature like Sauron, who has spent your entire existence trying to make the case be something else. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm is a Maya identifying himself, and it is the most powerful magic Gandalf ever performs in the book. It is also, according to the rule the Valar laid on him, very near the edge of what he is permitted to do. He has allowed it because the Balrog is not a person whose will is being coerced. The Balrog is a fellow angel, fallen, encountered as such. The contest is not for the Balrog's freedom. It is for the lives of the Fellowship, against a being already self-condemned. And even here, even in the most extreme moment in the book, Gandalf does it by speaking what is true. To see the moral grammar of magic at work in characters rather than concepts, the Legendarium offers 3 test cases. Each one starts from roughly the same place: high power, good intentions, access to deep craft. And each one diverges into a different fate. The first is Saruman. He is the cautionary case, and he is the one who most precisely illustrates the slide from art to engine. Saruman begins as the chief of the Order of Wizards. He arrives in Middle-earth with the same mandate as Gandalf: persuade, unite, advise, do not rule. And for centuries he keeps it. He studies. He becomes the realm's greatest authority on ring law and on the cunning craft of the Eldar. The fall is gradual. He starts to imagine, at first as a thought experiment, then as a plan, that the methods of the enemy could be appropriated for good ends. We must have power, power to order all things as we will, he tells Gandalf at Orthanc, for that good which only the wise can see. The sentence sounds reasonable. It is, by Tolkien's lights, the exact moment of damnation. The shift is not from good motive to bad motive, it is from sub-creation to engineering, from advising to ordering, from persuading wills to overriding them in service of a vision the persuader has decided is correct. The voice of Saruman is the perfect literary illustration. In a 1958 letter, Tolkien stressed that Saruman's voice did not hypnotize, did not enchant, did not bypass reason. The hearers were fully awake. They could refuse him by free will and reason. The horror of that voice is precisely that it works through legitimate means. It persuades. Listeners agree. They simply agree to things they would not have agreed to with a colder head, and they could have stopped at any moment, and they did not. This is Tolkien being very careful about the line. Saruman is evil not because he hexes people. He is evil because he uses the very faculty Gandalf is permitted, persuasion, to lead wills toward a domination they think they are choosing freely. The form is legitimate. The end state is the ring's end state. We must have power to order all things as we will. That is the One Ring's inscription, restated as policy. Sauron is the pure pole. There is no slide with him. He is born into magic in Tolkien's pejorative sense, and never even tries the alternative. In a 1963 letter to a reader named Ainulindalë, Tolkien wrote a sentence that ought to be quoted more often than it is. Sauron, he said, was weakened by long corruption and expenditure of will in dominating inferiors. Notice the diagnosis. Domination costs the dominator. Every will Sauron has bent has cost him a portion of his own being. That is why the ring exists in the first place. He had to externalize what he could no longer afford to keep inside himself. The ring is, among other things, an admission of weakness. The Lord of Magic and Machines is spending himself out into his devices because his original power has been corroded by the very activity he is built around. Tolkien's Sauron is not a freshly minted Dark Lord. He is an old Maya who has been hemorrhaging himself into other people's wills for thousands of years and is running on fumes. And then, between the cautionary case and the pure pole, there is the test passed. Galadriel in Lothlorien, when Frodo offers her the ring. The scene is structured as a deliberate inversion of Saruman at Orthanc. Saruman wants the ring. Galadriel is offered it. Saruman has rationalized his desire. Galadriel sees the desire fully and names it without flinching. Read what she says. "And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord, you will set up a queen. And I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night. Fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain. Dreadful as the storm and the lightning. Stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." This is the exact speech Saruman could not give about himself. The honesty of it is the point. Galadriel knows what the ring would make her. She knows it would not turn her into a tyrant by fooling her. It would turn her into a tyrant whose tyranny was wrapped in beauty so total that resistance would feel like ingratitude. All shall love me and despair. Domination disguised as benevolence. The exact failure mode Saruman hid from himself, named out loud. And then she chooses the other thing. I pass the test. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. That word, diminish, is the keystone of Tolkien's entire moral grammar of power. Subcreation, in his theory, is necessarily small. It ornaments, it does not originate. To remain a sub-creator at the end of the Third Age, when the ring is on the table, Galadriel has to accept that her people will fade, that Lothlorien will dim, that her age is ending, and she will be carried west into a smallness that is not failure, but fittedness. To remain Galadriel, to remain herself, the maker rather than the dominator, she has to be willing to be less than she could be. Saruman could not bear that smallness. Sauron never even glimpsed it. Galadriel chooses it. This is what passing the test looks like in the Legendarium. Not refusing power as such. Galadriel is one of the most powerful beings in the West, and remains so. but refusing power's instruments, letting the great wave of one's own will break against the limit of another's freedom and stop there, on purpose, every time. Step back, and the picture is clear enough to state plainly. In Middle-earth, the most powerful beings are the quietest. Tom Bombadil, who is older than the rivers, sings nonsense and laughs at the ring. Gandalf, who is an angelic spirit on loan from the Valar, lights pipes and tells stories and walks. Galadriel, who has crossed the grinding ice and seen the two trees, pours water from a pitcher into a basin and asks a hobbit to look. Aragorn, the rightful king, heals by laying his hands on a forehead and saying a name. Even Luthien, who in the Silmarillion single-handedly walks into the heart of evil and brings her dead lover back from beyond the world, does it by singing. Meanwhile, every pyrotechnic display in the Legendarium is the marker of a corruption. The eye of Sauron sweeping like a searchlight from Barad-dûr, the Witch King's blade flashing on the Pelennor, the voice of Saruman flooding the chamber at Orthanc, the fires of Isengard, the breeding pits, the ringwraith's shrieks. Spectacle, in Tolkien, is a tell. The more visible the operation, the more likely it is that what you are watching is no longer art, but engine. This is the inverse of every fantasy convention that has come after him. Take any of the systems modern fantasy has built since the 1970s, the spell slots of Dungeons & Dragons, the wand incantations of Hogwarts, the meticulously costed magical economies that have come to be called hard magic systems. Each is a marvelous achievement of imaginative engineering, and each, in the precise terms Tolkien laid down in 1951, is on the wrong side of his line. Spells are formulae. Formulae are technique. Technique is apparatus. Apparatus is the machine. The machine is the enemy's mode. This is not to indict an entire genre. People love these systems for excellent reasons. They make the impossible feel legible, and they let readers and players occupy the position of the maker. It is one of the genuine pleasures of fantasy, but it is worth being honest about what those systems are doing. They are giving the reader the very thing Tolkien spent 36 years arguing was the temptation. They put the engine in the protagonist's hand. They make the bulldozing of the world look like the protagonist's birthright. Tolkien saw this temptation everywhere, not just in fantasy. On Fairy Stories is gentle on the question of magic only because Tolkien believed enchantment was a real thing, recoverable in the right kind of story. But he was also clear that enchantment, the moment you tried to grasp it, became something else. His final word on this came at the very end of his life, in the strange, small fairy tale he wrote in 1967, Smith of Wootton Major. The protagonist of that story is given a star, a token of fairy, that lets him pass into the perilous realm. And what he learns over the course of a life of journeys is that the star is on loan. He cannot keep it. Fairy is not a country he can colonize. It is a stillness, Tolkien's word, in which Smith finds himself both in the world and in fairy, and also outside them and surveying them, so that he was at once in bereavement and in ownership and in peace. Then the star goes back. Smith comes home. The enchantment was real, and it could not be possessed. That is the deepest reason Gandalf does not cast spells. The spell, in the modern sense, the formula, the wand, the incantation that produces an effect on demand, is the wrong shape for what Tolkien thinks magic actually is. Magic, in his vocabulary, is the thing the enemy does. Enchantment, in his vocabulary, is the thing that happens when a sub-creator makes well, and the maker and the witness alike enter, briefly, the music, and it cannot be made to happen. It can only be received. When Gandalf walks across the Shire lighting fireworks for hobbits, he is, in a small way, doing the only kind of magic Tolkien believed in. He is making something beautiful with his Maya craft sublimated down to firework scale, for the joy of beings who did not ask him for it. The fireworks are a gift, not an instrument. They serve no purpose. They cost nothing to anyone's freedom. They light the sky for a few seconds, and then they are gone. And hobbits look up and feel for that moment that the world is larger than they had thought. That is what Tolkien's magic looks like when it is working. Quiet, free, derivative, bounded, and entirely unavailable to anyone who was looking for power. The lesson here runs deeper than the genre, and deeper than the Reddit thread that occasioned it. What Tolkien refused to give Gandalf was not a power set, it was a posture toward the world. The posture of the maker who knows the score is not his own. In Middle-earth, the quietest acts are the loudest. A pipe relit in the dark, water poured into a basin, a pine cone struck a light to scare wargs from a cold mountainside. Fireworks for hobbits who did not ask for them. These are the spells. These are the only ones that ever worked. If this kind of slow read of Tolkien is your thing, subscribe to Ranger of the Realms. There is a long list of these still to come. And in the comments, name the smallest moment of Gandalf's magic that has stayed with you longest, because that is almost certainly the one Tolkien meant. Walk softly through the made world.